On July 30th, 20 years ago, more than 450,000 people joined the Rolling Stones, Rush, AC/DC, and a stellar lineup of performers for an event unofficially known as Sarstock. At the 20th anniversary of that record-breaking event, Dennis Mills, your host of this podcast, chatted with celebrated radio broadcaster Greg Brady on his program, Toronto Today with Greg Brady. We feature that unedited conversation in this episode of The Life of a Servant. Keep listening to learn more about the untold story behind that event. You'll also hear why Canada's Prime Minister should consider collaborating and serving more closely with the Mayor of Toronto to address the big challenges we face today.
This is Toronto Today with Greg Brady.
Toronto's news, today's talk.
640 Toronto.
I've been waiting all alone. I've been hanging on the phone. Lord, I miss you. I've been hanging on the phone. I've been sleeping all alone. I won't kiss you.
All right, that's live. Well, not live, but it's a live song. It's not happening right now. That's the Stones with Justin Timberlake on stage. Yeah, they invited him back out, and he was a good sport for coming out. And he thought, well, this will be the worst thing that happens to me. And then the Super Bowl with Janet Jackson happened 7 months later. So things got better after that. Let's put it that way. 450,000 people at the largest outdoor ticketed event in Canadian history, and it still holds that record. Molson Canadian Rocks for Toronto, also known as Sarstock, and we're lucky enough to have the MP that helped spearhead this concert. Took a lot of pulling and tugging in a lot of different directions during the SARS era, but this concert happened on July 30th of 2003. He is Dennis Mills. Dennis, thank you very much for coming on Toronto Today. I greatly appreciate it.
Greg, real pleasure to be on your show, and I really enjoyed listening to the discussion before I came on. It was so appropriate in light of the 20-year experience that we had with the rock concert, because our event was all about collaboration, cooperation, federal government, provincial government, municipal, police, etc., and that's exactly what we need to do today to solve the housing crisis.
Let's stick with that for a sec, because I'd love to hear your perspective on that. It did feel like that 2003, at least in Canada, Dennis, was more an era where you and I could have 20 issues and maybe we'd agree on 16 or 17 of them, mildly disagree on one, maybe adamantly disagree on a couple, but we could agree on the 16 things to get done. Now it's almost like, I don't like one idea you have, now I don't like you, and I'm cutting you out of my life. It feels like that's politics in this day and age.
Well, that's exactly, you've nailed it. But I tell you, and I'm a liberal, as you know, a federal liberal, and I really believe that the issue is not Olivia Chow, the mayor of Toronto. I believe that the real issue is our prime minister has to come to Toronto, sit in a room for 2 weeks with Olivia to help Olivia, because as Toronto goes, the nation goes. We represent 20% of the gross national product of this country. And unless we get Toronto fixed and fast, we're all going to be in trouble. The canoe will tip, as you properly described before I came on the air.
Well, that's what but that's what I didn't like about the tone and just a letter from Chrystia Freeland last week to Olivia Chow.
That was just plain wrong.
Wrong. And yet, you can't control Freeland's actions, but we can't control things that happen to us in life. We can control how we react to them. But I need Chow not to throw her arms up in the air and go, well, I tried 3 weeks in. How about taking in some refugees into Toronto homes? I need her to push hard back, because we need a battler. And I need to make sure that she's she can put her shoulder pads and helmet on and go marching to Queen's Park and go marching to the House of Commons and say, your response wasn't good enough.
Yeah, but Greg, she shouldn't have to do that.
I know.
This is we're putting the emphasis on the wrong person. When we did SARS 20 years ago, I didn't go to the mayor of the city of Toronto or Premier Eves, even though they helped. I went to the Prime Minister. I called Jean Chrétien, and I said, Jean, the Stones are willing to do this, but we got to step up. And Chrétien, to his credit, said, well, get Fantino on side for the security and the police, and we'll be in. And that's what happened. And Fantino wrote a letter in 5 minutes once I met with him. And that's the kind of thing that we need to do now. Our problems in Toronto start at the top. Olivia Chow can't do this by herself. That city council doesn't have 1/100th of the power that the Prime Minister of Canada has in terms of getting Toronto where it needs to be.
I agree with you. And I don't know how it got there, but you just documented it. We've arrived here. So it doesn't almost like it's rear view mirror stuff, not from you and not from me, but we're where we're at now for a lot of reasons. We just have to figure out how we pick ourselves up off the ground and come up with solutions here. And right now, there's just so much finger pointing. There's just and I saw it during the mayor election. So did you. There was too much of it and there weren't tangible ideas.
Greg, I totally agree with you, but now is now. And I'll tell you, again, going back to our 20th anniversary moment, which is why you wanted me on the show, and we're trying to make it relevant to today's scene.
Yeah.
The word that I would describe 20 years ago was selflessness. This was Ernie Eves, all the Western premiers, the city of Toronto. We were all in the same canoe, and we all knew that if anybody tried to do the wrong thing, the whole canoe would tip and we'd all go in. And so we all collaborated, cooperated. It was an act of selflessness. And selflessness, serving the people, selflessness needs to be brought back into the political environment.
I love the concept. I wish we had that world in 2003. I wish we had no social media. I wish we weren't doing things, Dennis, if you will, for clicks and likes or because it'll land well with the public. I think we did less photo ops then and more practical stuff. There's always going to be photo ops, and politicians, as you know, will politic. But I just think we're too stuck in the mud right now. And it's very frustrating. I'm looking for people I'm not cynical about, Dennis, and it's harder to find than ever.
Well, but your job, Greg, and I say this respectfully, as one of the leading journalists in Canada,
thank you.
Your job is to push the Prime Minister to get into action in Toronto. Tell him to move into Olivia Chow's office for 2 weeks and help her out. She cannot do this by herself.
Yeah, I hear you. And I also think I'd like to hear more from City Council of stepping up. I think she took a lot of slings and arrows from the police last week. I would have liked to see City Council step up and say, either we're all in this together or we're not. Somebody needs to facilitate. Dennis, that bad relationship goes back to when you were an MP between Chow and the police, and we need to figure out a way to make it work. And by the way, the police aren't innocent victims here. They've made their own bed at times with the community, at times with the marginalized people in the city, at times with the black community in the city. We got to call things as they are sometimes, and we've got to figure out a way to make it better going forward instead of worrying about what we did 15, 20 years ago.
Well, I've had my differences with Olivia Chow, but if Olivia Chow called me right now and asked me to take out her garbage for the next month in her office, for the sake of the city of Toronto, I would happily do it. And that's what I really think the national leadership has to do as well, has to get involved and help her out. Dennis
Mills, the former Toronto area MP, and he's joining us now, helping get SARS Fest together 20 years ago. Yesterday was the concert that really brought Toronto back. Dennis, what do you remember about the very first conversation you had, and did the idea just grow bigger and bigger and bigger as the conversations went along?
Well, the first thing that happened, there was a great local business community that came together with all kinds of ideas because, as you know, our hospitality industry, hotels, restaurants, etc., had totally collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
But the plan was for not the summer of 2003, it was for 2004. Well, in my riding out there in the Danforth, they had over 300 restaurants. They wouldn't have been able to see September, let alone next year. So I went up and had a visit with Michael Cole, and really I give Michael Cole all the credit for making this happen, because I sat with him and I said, Michael, the city's been good to the both of us. You've got the stones. I think I can deliver the government. And what do you think of this idea? Because the stones have global reach. And he said, I totally agree with you. He said they're on tour in Europe. And he said, I'll talk to the boys tonight and I'll let you know tomorrow whether or not we can arrange something, because there's about a 2-week break towards the end of July on the European tour. And so, to Michael's credit and the Stones' credit, of course, the following day I got a fax saying that they were ready to make the time, but here's the price. Now, you have to know that I was practically stoned because everybody thought I was nuts wanting to use taxpayers' money to give to Mick Jagger and the Stones. And so we came to a compromise in the city on talk shows like yours, where we said, the community said, and they were forceful, no taxpayers' money for the artists. That has to be the private sector. So then fast forward to Dan O'Neill, 2 days later, the then president of Molson's, and he said, we're in for the artists. You've got to deliver the government. And then, so those were 3 really defining days of must get these things in order.
So the show's in late July. What day do what day do you get all these commitments from Rush, AC/DC, the Stones?
We had 10 weeks to put it together.
Okay.
10 weeks. Now I will tell you this: one of the real advantages that we had was the fact that the year before we did the Pope at Downsview, so we had a template for washrooms, security, transportation challenges, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was a big advantage. But in the end, we needed not just Chief Julian Fantino, but we needed the TTC. We needed Wheel-Trans. And again, I know I'm probably boring your readers or your listeners when I say this. The collaboration and the cooperation in that 10-week period was amazing. I remember about a month before the event, we were $2 million short to get this job done. And I called Ernie Eves, and Ernie Eves was so amazing. He said, I'm going to send Tony Clement up there, who was the then health minister, of course, responsibility for SARS. Tony came right to the field at Downsview, and he said, I'm going to make this happen. And he brought Ron Fabro from the Ontario Lottery and Gaming. They went around, they saw that the reason we needed the extra money is we were going to do this mile-long barbecue because of the beef situation in Western Canada.
Yeah.
And the decision was made. And that kind of hands-on, get your hands, dirty, mix it up, go to the actual site, hang around. And quite frankly, Ralph Klein, the premier of Alberta, he was practically on the site for about 3 full weeks, sort of leading up to the final event. And again, I'm repeating myself, but that's the kind of action we need today.
It's so fascinating, and again, it's such a legacy, and I'm so glad you let us reach out to you to remember how it was important because of the event itself, Dennis. But then it was also, there were so many ripple effects, and it felt like on a global stage, Toronto's back. It helped those restaurants on the Danforth, but it also helped tourism. It also helped people, again, similar to where we were probably a year ago this time. It's okay to gather again. It's okay to get back together. It's okay to live the life that you were living in 2019 again without judgment. Like, it was so important to push us forward in 2003, 2004.
Well, let me tell your listeners one really fascinating story on that point. My colleague that worked hand in glove with me on this, Senator Jerry Grafstein, the objective, of course, was to get our signal and message all over the world. So we decided one day to reach out to the Secretary of Defense for the United States, because we wanted to get it to all the U.S. military bases. They are in 97 countries, etc. And so I said, but Jerry, I'm not making that call because MP in the United States means nothing. Senator means something. So we got the phone number from Tom Donahue, the head of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, because he loved the idea and he loved Toronto and Canada. And Senator Grafstein called the Secretary of Defense, and the Chief of Staff came on the line. Yes, Senator, what can I do for you? Well, we're doing this. And he said, I'll get back to you in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
20 minutes later, he says, I have the secure U.S. defense satellite for your signal. We'll ship this to 97 bases around the world, our 182 ships at sea, and we'll also put it up on the space station. like Greg, where do you get that?
I don't know. Yeah. Music for astronauts, because they need that sometimes. Hey, I got to blast time wise, but by the way, I know what an advocate for Toronto's waterfront you are. So please come on in the next week or two, and let's talk about Ontario Place. I'd love to do that with you, just to talk about your vision. Where I know, where it's going to go.
I'm happy to do it, but you
can't swear. You can use some swear words, but not others. How about those parameters?
It was fun chatting with you. Let's get Trudeau working in Olivia Chow's office and get things on the right track.
Okay, inner basement with his own laundry. I gotcha. To wash those socks. Thanks, Dennis. I appreciate it.
This is Toronto Today with Greg Brady.
Toronto's news, today's talk.
640 Toronto.
You have been listening to The Life of a Servant, a Dennis Mills podcast. Visit dennismills.com for more information and archived episodes of this program.